Welcome to Billerica Public Library's Book Buzz July releases. Relax and listen about some great new additions at Billerica Public Library and Merrimack Valley Consortium. We hope that you find at least one book that will have you running to the library to borrow it. Our first genre is contemporary fiction. Calling for Blanket Dance by Oscar Hockey. Told in a series of voices, Calling for a Blanket Dance takes us into the life of Eva through the multi-generational perspective of his family as they face many obstacles. His father's injury at the hands of corrupt police, his mother's struggle to hold on to her job and care for her husband, the constant resettlement of the family, and the legacy of centuries of injustice all intensify Eva's bottled up rage. Meanwhile, all of Ever's relatives have ideas about who he is and who he should be. His Cherokee grandmother urges the family to move across Oklahoma to find security. His grandfather hopes to reunite him with his heritage through traditional gourd dances. His Kiowa cousin reminds him that he's connected to an ancestral past. And once an adult, Eva must take the strength given to him by his relatives to save not only himself, but also the next generation of family. Corrine by Rebecca Morrow. You want to walk away from the things that are bad for you and never look back. That's what Corrine Callahan wants. Cast out of a fundamentalist church she was raised in and cut off from her family, Corrine builds a new life for herself, a good one. But she never stops missing the life and the love she left behind. It's Enoch Miller who ruins everything for her. It was always him. She'll never get him out from under her skin. Fellowship Point by Alice Elliott Dark. Celebrated children's book author Agnes Lee is determined to secure her legacy, to complete her final volume of the Franklin Square novels, and even more consuming, to permanently protect the peninsula of majestic coast in Maine known as Fellowship Point. To donate the land to a trust, Agnes must convince shareholders to dissolve a generations old partnership, and one of those shareholders is her best friend Polly. Polly exalts in creating beauty and harmony in her home, in her friendships, and in her family. Polly soon finds her loyalties torn between the wishes of her best friend and the wishes of her three sons. But what is it that Polly wants herself? Sugar and Salt by Susan Wiggs. Jerome Sugar learned the art of baking in his grandma's bakery, also called Sugar, in San Francisco. He supplies baked goods to the Lost and Found bookshop across the street. When the restaurant shares his commercial kitchen loses its longtime tenant, a newcomer moves in, Margaret Salton, a barbecue master from Texas. Margaret isn't exactly on the run, but she needs a fresh start. Her dream has been to open a restaurant somewhere far, far from Texas. The shared kitchen with Jerome's Sugar Bakery is the perfect setup. A state-of-the-art kitchen in a vibrant neighborhood popular with tourists and locals. Despite their different backgrounds, their attraction is powerful, even though Jerome worries that Margaret will simply move on from him once she found some peace and stability. But just as she starts to relax into a happy new future, Margaret's past in Texas comes back to haunt her. The Poet's House by Jean Thompson. Carla is in her 20s, working for a landscaper, lacking confidence, still unsure what direction her life will take. Verdian is a lauded and lovely aging poet whose reputation has been defined by her infamous affair with the famous male poet, Mathis, many years earlier. When Carla is hired to work at Verdian's house, she is confused by this community of writers, their tendency to recite lines in conversation, the stories of their many liaisons, and their endless wine-soaked nights. As Vernon's standing begins to fade, a number of people angle to gain possession of Matthew's cycle of poems written about Vernon, a cycle he famously burned as he read them. Yet long after Matthew's death, one copy must still rest with Vernon. If so, why won't she release it? The Littlest Library by Poppy Alexander. Jess Metcalf is perfectly happy with her quiet, predictable life. It's just the way she likes it. But when her beloved grandmother passes away and she loses her job at the local library, her life is turned upside down. Packing up her grandmother's books, she moves to a tiny cottage in a charming country village. To her surprise, Jess finds herself the owner of an old red telephone box, too, and she soon turns it into the littlest library around. It's not long before the books are borrowed and begin to work their magic. Somehow they seem to be bringing the villagers together once more. Maybe it's finally time for Jess to follow her heart and find a place to call home. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. On a bitter cold day in December of his junior year at Harvard, Sam exits a subway car and sees, amid the hordes of people waiting on the platform, Sadie. He calls her name. For a moment, she pretends she hasn't heard him, but then she turns and a game begins. A legendary collaboration that will launch them into stardom. These friends since childhood borrow money, beg favors, and before even graduating college, they have created their first blockbuster. Ichigo. Overnight, the world is theirs. Not even 25 years old, Sam and Sadie are brilliant, successful, and rich. But these qualities won't protect them from their own creative ambitions or betrayals of their hearts. Our second genre is historical fiction. The Librarian Spy by Madeline Martin. Ava thought a job as a librarian at the Library of Congress would mean a quiet, routine existence, but an unexpected offer from the U.S. military has brought her to Lisbon with a new mission, posing as a librarian while working undercover as a spy gathering intelligence. Meanwhile, in occupied France, Elaine has begun an apprenticeship at a printing press run by members of the resistance. It's a job usually reserved for men, but in the war, those rules have been forgotten. Yet she knows that the Nazis are searching for the press and its printer in order to silence them. As the battle in Europe rages, Ava and Elaine find themselves connecting through coded messages and discovering hope in the face of war. Switchboard Soldiers by Jennifer Schiavini. In June 1917, General John Pershing arrived in France to establish American forces in Europe. He immediately found himself unable to communicate with the troops in the field. Pershing needed operators who could swiftly and accurately connect multiple calls, speak fluent French and English, remain steady under fire, and be utterly discreet, since the calls often conveyed classified information. At the time, nearly all well trained American telephone operators were women, but women were not permitted to enlist or even to vote in most states. Nevertheless, the U.S. Army Signal Corps promptly began recruiting them. More than 7,600 women responded, including Grace Banker of New Jersey, a switchboard instructor with AT&T, Marie Morzic, a French woman and an aspiring opera singer, and Valerie Dismint, a 20-year-old Pacific telephone operator from Los Angeles. They were among the first women sworn into the U.S. Army under the Articles of War. The male soldiers they had replaced had needed 1 minute to connect each call. The switchboard soldiers could do it in 10 seconds. The risk of death was real. Women worked as bombs fell around them, and as was the threat of deadly new disease, the Spanish flu. Not all of the telephone operators would. Our third genre is romance. The Best Is Yet to Come by Debbie McComber. A new beginning in charming Oceanside, Washington is exactly what Hope Goodwin needs after the death of her twin brother. There are plenty of distractions like her cozy cottage with slightly nosy landlords next door and a brewing drama among her students at the local high school. Even having settled quickly into the community, Hope still feels something is still missing. That is until the landlords convince her to volunteer at their animal shelter. There she meets Shadow, a rescue dog that everyone has given up on. But true to her name, Hope believes he's worth saving. Like Shadow, shelter volunteer Cade Lincoln is suffering with injuries most can't see. A wounded ex Marine, Kate identifies with Shadow, assuming they are both beyond help. Hope senses that what they each need is someone to believe in them, and she has a lot of love to give. As she gains Shadow's trust, Hope notices Cade begins to open up as well. Finding the courage to be vulnerable again, Cade and Hope take steps toward a relationship, and Hope finally begins to feel at peace in her new home. Love and compassion are supposed to heal all wounds, but are they enough to help Hope and Cade overcome the pain of their past and the obstacles in the way of a better future? The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. Hannah Brooks is an executive protection agent, aka bodyguard, and she just got hired to protect superstar actor Jack Stapleton from his middle aged stalker. Jack Stapleton's a household name, captured by paparazzi on beaches the world over, famous for, among other things, rising out of the waves in all manner of clingy board shorts and glistening like a Roman god. But in the wake of a family tragedy, he dropped from the public eye and went off grid. When Jack's mom gets sick, he comes home to the family's Texas ranch to help out. Only one catch: he doesn't want his family to know about his stalker or the bodyguard thing. And so Hannah, against her will and her better judgment, finds herself pretending to be Jack's girlfriend as a cover. What could possibly go wrong? Hannah hardly believes it herself, but the more time she spends with Jack, the more real it all seems to be. And there lies the heartbreak, because it's easy for Hannah to protect Jack, but protecting her own long neglected heart, that's the hardest thing she's ever done. The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Florence Day is the ghostwriter for one of the most prolific romance authors in the industry, and she has a problem. After a terrible breakup, she no longer believes in love. It's as good as dead. When her new editor, Ben, a too handsome mountain of a man, won't give her an extension on her book deadline, Florence prepares to kiss her career goodbye. But then she gets a phone call she never wanted to receive. She must return home from the first time in a decade to help her family bury her beloved father. For 10 years, she's run from the town that never understood her. She can't bring herself to stay, even with her father gone. It feels like nothing in this town has changed, and she hates it. Until she finds a ghost standing at the parlor's front door, just as broad and handsome as ever, and he's just as confused about why he's there as she is. The True Love Bookshop by Annie Raines. For Tess Lane, owning Lakeside Books is a dream come true, but it's a weekly book club she hosts for the women in town that Tess enjoys the most. The gatherings have been her lifeline over the past 3 years, since her husband's mysterious death. Tess has tried to move on, but when River Harrison shows up on her doorstep, all her lingering questions come rushing back. River, a former Marine turned private investigator, was her husband's best friend. Seeing him again is a reminder of everything Tess lost. At first, she tries to ignore him, but Tess comes to realize that this is her chance, once and for all, to find the answers that have troubled her for years. The fourth genre is fantasy science fiction. In the Middle of Hickory Lane by Heather Weber. Emmy has wanted nothing more her whole life than to feel like part of a family. Having grown up on the run with her con artist mother, she's been shuffled from town to town, drawn into bad situations, and has learned some unsavory habits that she tried hard to overcome. When her estranged grandmother tracks her down out of the blue and extends a job offer, helping to run her booth at an open air marketplace in the small town Sweetgrass, Alabama, Emmy is hopeful that she'll finally be able to plant roots she's always dreamed of. But some habits are hard to break, and she risks her newfound happiness by keeping one big truth to herself. Cora B has her hands full with volunteering, gardening, her job as a color consultant and designer, and just about anything else she can do to keep her mind off her painful past, a past that has resulted in her holding most everyone at arm's length. The last thing she wants is to form close relationships only to have her heart broken yet again. But when she's injured, she had no choice other than to let people into her life, and soon realized that it's going to be impossible to keep her heart safe or her secrets hidden. Upgrade by Blake Crouch. You are the next step in human evolution. At first, Logan isn't sure if anything's different. He just feels a little sharper, better able to concentrate, better at multitasking, reading a bit faster, memorizing better, and needing less sleep. But before long, he can't deny it. Something's happening to his brain, to his body. He's starting to see the world and those around him, even though he loves most, in whole new ways. The truth is, Logan's genes have been hacked, and there's a reason he's been targeted for this upgrade, a reason that goes back decades to the darkest part of his past and a horrific family legacy. Worse still, what's happening to him is just the first step in a much larger plan, one that will inflict the same changes on humanity at large at a terrifying cost. Because of his new abilities, Logan's the one person in the world capable of stopping what's been set in motion. But to have a chance at winning this war, he'll have to become something other than himself, maybe even something other than human. The fifth genre is mystery and suspense. Death and the Conjurer by Tom Mead. In 1930s London, celebrity psychiatrist Anselm Reeds is discovered dead in his locked study, and there seems to be no way that a killer could have escaped unseen. There are no clues, no witnesses, and no evidence of the murder weapon. Stumped by the confounding scene, Scotland Yard Detective Flinton on the case calls on a retired stage magician turned part-time sleuth, Joseph Spector. For who better to make sense of the impossible than one who traffics in illusion? And when a second murder occurs, this time in an impenetrable elevator, they realize that the crime wave will become even more deadly unless they can catch the culprit soon. Grace Under Fire by Julie Garwood. Grace Isabel McKenna has 100 things to do today. Killing someone isn't one of them. It is supposed to be a quick visit to Boston for the Buchanan anniversary party, then on to Scotland to collect an inheritance. She checks into her hotel and then decides to go for a brisk walk. But after getting lost, she ends up with the wounded man stumbling into her arms and his shooter coming after them both. When she fires back in self defense, she doesn't expect him to drop dead. After Isabel endures an interrogation by police, she is free to go, thanks to the Buchanans dispatching former Navy SEAL and now lawyer Michael Buchanan to assist her. When Isabel goes to Scotland to claim her inheritance, Michael follows her. But he isn't the only thing she can't shake. Mysterious threats against Isabel surface, and before they can deal with their growing feelings for each other, Michael and Isabel must first survive. Grave Reservations by Cherry Priest. Meet Lita Foley, devoted friend, struggling travel agent, and inconsistent psychic. When Lita, sole proprietor of Foley's Flights of Fancy, impulsively rebooks Seattle PD Detective Grady Merritt's flight, her life changes in ways she couldn't have predicted. After watching his original plane blow up from the safety of the airport, Grady realizes that Lita's special abilities could help him with a cold case he just can't crack. Despite her scattershot premonitions, she agrees for a secret reason. Her fiancé's murder remains unsolved. Lita's psychic abilities couldn't help the case several years before, but she's been honing her skills and drawing a crowd at her favorite bar's open mic nights, where she performs clairvoyant karaoke, singing whatever song comes to mind when she holds people's personal effects. Now joined by a ragtag group of bar patrons and pals alike, Lita and Grady set out to catch a killer and learn how the two cases that haunt them have more in common than they ever suspected. The Retreat by Sarah Pierce. An idyllic wellness retreat has opened on an island off the English coast, promising rest and relaxation, but the island itself, known locally as Reaper's Rock, has a dark past. Once the playground of a serial killer, it's rumored to be cursed. A young woman is found dead below the pavilion in what seems to be a tragic fall. But Detective Elan Warren soon learns that the victim wasn't a guest. She wasn't meant to be on the island at all. The longer Elan stays, the more secrets she uncovers. And when someone else drowns in a diving incident, Elan begins to suspect that there's nothing accidental about these deaths. But why would someone target the guests at this luxury resort? She must find the killer before the island's history starts to repeat itself. Dark Objects by Simon Tone. A glamorous woman is murdered in her London mansion and her husband goes missing. But according to public records, neither of them exist. The only leads police have several objects arranged around the woman's body, including a set of keys and a book called How to Process a Murder by Lawton Rees, a book that appears to have helped the killer forensically cleanse the crime scene. Lawton Rees is an academic who doesn't usually work live cases after the brutal murder of her mother as a teen left her traumatized and emotionally scarred. But the presence of a book at the scene draws her unwillingly into a high profile investigation and media circus that springs up around it. As the dark objects found beside the body lead her closer to the victim's identity, a dangerous threat to Lawton and her daughter emerges, as well as painful memories of her past related to the man she's always blamed for her mother's death, John Reeds, Lawton's father, the current Metropolitan Chief Commissioner, and the man she has not spoken to in 20 years. Lawton's family was destroyed once, and she built herself a new one. Now she has to face her darkest fears and help catch a killer before this one is destroyed, too. Holy Child by David Rosenfeld. Retired lawyer Andy Carpenter's calling has always been running the Terror Foundation. The dog rescue organization places hundreds of dogs in new homes every year. It's added up to so many dogs and new owners that Andy can't even do the math. But there's one dog and one owner Andy will always remember. About a year ago, Rachel Morehouse came to the foundation looking for a companion. In her 60s and recently widowed, Rachel wanted a senior dog that also needed someone. Andy took a liking to her. Rachel took a liking to Lion, an older Chow Chow, and the rest is history. That is, until Rachel calls Andy begging for a favor. If Rachel dies, will Andy take care of Lion if her stepson cannot? Andy agrees, no questions asked, and promptly forgets about it until he receives a call from Rachel's estate to attend her will reading, which is where he meets Rachel's stepson Tony, who was promptly arrested for his stepmother's murder, and he wants Andy to prove his innocence. Andy has continued to learn more about the woman he so greatly admired and the businesses she ran. And holy child, was this woman impressive. The person who killed her deserves to be held accountable. And if Tony is to believe, they're still out there. And that possibility is too much for Andy to remain on the sidelines. Our last genre is nonfiction. All American Dogs by Andrew Hager. President Biden's German Shepherds, Major and the late Champ, are the latest in the long line of presidential dogs, dating all the way back to George Washington. Dogs have been a constant companion to nearly all of America's presidents. Of the past 46 presidents, 31 have had at least one dog at 1600 Pennsylvania Ave. Organized by historical eras, All American Dogs will take readers through the captivating history of the White House's four-legged friends and the impact they had on their owners and chiefs and ultimately American history. As historian in residence at the Presidential Pet Museum, Andrew Hager will include original research and rare photographs from the National Archives to trace history of the Americans' first dogs. From post-revolutionary dogs to Civil War era dogs to Cold War dogs, Hager will show the differences and the similarities on how our nation viewed man's best friend. Reading for Our Lives by Mara Payne Smart. When her child went off to school, Mara Smart was shocked to discover that a good education in America is a long shot in ways that few parents fully appreciate. Our current approach to literacy offers too little, too late, and attempting to play catch up when our kids get to kindergarten can no longer be our default strategy. We have to start at the top. The brain architecture for reading develops rapidly during infancy, and early language experience are critical to building it. That means parents' work as children's first teacher begins from day one, two, and when we need deeper knowledge to play our positions. The School That Escaped the Nazis by Deborah Cadbury. In 1933, the same year Hitler came to power, schoolteacher Anna Essinger saved her small progressive school from Nazi Germany. Anna had read Mein Kampf and knew the terrible danger that Hitler's hate fueled ideologies posed to her pupils. So she hatched a courageous and daring plan to smuggle her school to the safety of England. As the school she established in Kent, England flourished despite the many challenges it faced, the news from her home country continued to darken. Anna watched as Europe slid toward war, with devastating consequences for the Jewish children left behind. In time, Anna would take in orphans who have given up all hope, survivors of unimaginable horrors. Anna's school offered these scarred children the love and security they needed to rebuild their lives.